Mitigating the potential effects of earthquakes is white supremacy. That's the official position of the American National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Meanwhile, British men are starting to find out the extent to which paternity fraud goes on in their country. Suffice to say that the whole fairer sex narrative is rapidly collapsing. Now, speaking of Britain, the taxpayers will be paying for IVF for gay men. And if you ask whose asshole gets pregnant, you'll be prosecuted or at least visited by the police to be asked to check your thinking. In other news, saying that Jenner is still a man can get your property destroyed, and the left confirmed in public that yes, they're really just a bunch of spoiled children in adult bodies, since their thinking hasn't grown beyond the age of 7, and that is me being generous. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the 28th installment of Periodic Insanity. Alrighty, let's move faster through the stories so I can finish the queue, and then maybe I'll record the good news videos episodes too. Well, if time will allow. The first one has an insane title, ABC 13W set, NAACP links earthquake signs in Oregon to white supremacy. I mean, at first when I saw this in my app that's sorting my news, when I first saw this headline, I thought this is along the lines of earthquakes happen because of gays. I swear, that's what I first thought. But no, it's a bit more elaborate than that. Though the connection to white supremacy is, as always with far-left racists, a gigantic stretch. A new city policy requiring public signs on brick buildings warning they might collapse in an earthquake is part of a long history of white supremacy aimed at forcing black people to move out of neighborhoods, the NAACP of Portland, Oregon says. The group on Thursday decried the policy affecting some 1,600 unreinforced masonry buildings that are on average 90 years old, many in areas with a predominantly black population, the Oregonian reports. The policy exacerbates a long history of systemic and structural betrayals of trust and policies of displacement, demolition, and dispossession predicated on classism, racism, and white supremacy, the group said. The NAACP said the policy will make it tougher for owners of brick buildings to get loans and will discourage investment. It says that means buildings will have to be sold and that developers will demolish and redevelop, increasing the cost to live there and forcing current residents out. It speaks to our houses of worship and everything about the black presence in the north-northeast area, said the Reverend E.D. Mondane, a pastor at Celebration Tabernacle Church in North Portland and president of Portland's NAACP chapter. City officials say the ordinance approved in October is part of an effort ultimately aimed at upgrading old buildings to withstand an earthquake. Those seismic upgrades likely wouldn't be required for at least 20 years. Such upgrades could cost brick building owners millions of dollars. Experts say Portland is at risk because there's close to a 50% chance of a giant earthquake along the Cascadian subduction zone off the Oregon coast in the next 50 years. The warning signs and the requirement that building owners must file a record of compliance is really just a disclosure, said Alex Cousins, a spokesman for the City Bureau of Development Services. That's the purpose behind it. The warning signs are to go up on public buildings this month and on most other buildings by March the 1st. The warning on them says this is an unreinforced masonry building. Unreinforced masonry buildings may be unsafe in the event of a major earthquake. In related action, a non-profit coalition of Portland brick building owners recently filed a lawsuit seeking to block the ordinance, arguing it's unconstitutional under free speech and due process rights. The government is forcing private property owners to basically broadcast the government's message instead of their own, said John Di Lorenzo, an attorney for the group. Also, a coalition of music venues called Music Portland has sided with the NAACP, saying the ordinance threatens some 30 of its music venues, close quote. Now, the free speech argument is quite a solid one, and it has legal precedent too. If you remember, a pro-life group in California won against the local far-leftist government, which tried to force them to broadcast a far-leftist view on abortion to their customers. But admittedly, that case was also predicated on the notion that the government is forcing a political speech upon private citizens. Here, it's a lot harder to say that a safety message concerning unreinforced masonry constitutes political speech. Nevertheless, the First Amendment case is pretty solid. With that said, the NAACP's case is complete and utter garbage. First of all, earthquakes don't give a shit about your race. When an earthquake happens, the only thing that matters is whether your building can withstand it or not. That's it. The demographics of the inhabitants are irrelevant, and they are as irrelevant as they can possibly be. So from that perspective, criticizing the ordinance on anti-racism grounds is quite dumb. Even if you could argue that those buildings are kinda crap because of racist policies, which I don't think is the case either, but even if you could successfully argue that, it still doesn't change the fact that those buildings need reparations, need renovations, need reinforcement. And it's not even a right now thing. You have 20 years at the very least to start implementing the upgrade. So instead of crying racism, the NAACP could perhaps, earmark some funds to help out those people. Now that would make a positive contribution to the black community over there. But you see, the NAACP is not and hasn't been for quite some time about the advancement of colored people, as the name says. The NAACP is about the advancement of personal interests and political careers of far-left activists who may or may not be colored people. I don't know how you put that into an acronym, but that would be a far more honest name for this organization. And no, I'm not even joking. I mean, the NAACP's revenue is about $28 million per year. So if they'd earmark just $300,000 every year, they could subsidize the renovations for the whole area in 10 years, and thus avoid the so-called gentrification, and no residents would be driven out. And they could in fact contribute even more if they'd spend $50,000 on a PR campaign to gather funds specifically for this. I'm sure many people would donate for a concrete cause, no pun intended, with visible and tangible results for real-life people, a lot more than for more abstract causes whose usefulness for your average person is debatable, to say the least. But again, that would mean the NAACP actually working as intended. So in other words, it won't happen. Alright, next. Thousands of dads are left in shock as do-it-yourself paternity tests soar, titles the Daily Mail. Sales of secret paternity tests are surging, according to suppliers of do-it-yourself home kits. The DNA tests, which can be carried out with simple cheek swabs, are leading to growing numbers of men discovering they are not the biological father of children they had been led to believe were theirs. Alpha Biolabs, the leading British home test supplier, says up to 30,000 paternity tests are being performed in this country every year, and that the figures are rising by 10% per year. Of these, around 20% of men will learn they are not the father of the child they are testing, says the company's director, David Thomas. He added that in some regions the figure is higher, including the Northeast, where it is 30%. The explosion in demand for the tests has been fueled by the ease with which definitive DNA paternity results can now be obtained. For about £99, testing kits which promise 100% accurate next-day results can be bought online. Instead of requiring the physical presence at a clinic of both parties being tested, they involve only swabs taken from the inside cheeks of father and child, which are then packaged up and posted to the company. As long as the man is named on the child's birth certificate or has a parental responsibility, no permission is required from either the mother or the child, meaning the test can be carried out in total secrecy. Some websites suggest DNA can be taken from children while they are asleep to avoid awkward questions, particularly if the children are older. In some US states, concern over this has led to a recent ban on do-it-yourself home testing, with all tests now having to be ordered by a doctor or court official and conducted under their supervision. In Britain, there is no such legislation currently being considered. Experts warn that the shock of learning a child is not biologically theirs can lead to severe emotional distress for some men, for which they may not be prepared. Last week, the Mail on Sunday revealed the case of MoneySupermarket.com co-founder Richard Mason, who discovered the 3 sons he had raised as his own with his ex-wife Kate were not biologically his. Mr. Mason's devastating realization was the result of him being diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, which led doctors to inform him he had been infertile since birth. After the diagnosis, he confronted his ex-wife and uncovered the truth that his sons had been conceived by another man with whom she had conducted a 4-year affair. The rising numbers of men turning to paternity testing suggests there are many who feel they may have been duped by women. Mr. Thomas says, sometimes men will be delighted to learn they aren't the father, usually when a woman with whom they have been having a casual relationship tells him he has fathered the baby and he can prove otherwise. In other cases, it's the mother who's ordered the test to shut the father up, close quote. Now, the insanity part here is that in some US states, these things have been banned. And they have been banned for the completely insane reason that women should be believed a priori, when in reality they really shouldn't. There is no objective reason to believe women automatically when they say a certain man is the father. Because, as it turns out, and it has been turning out for decades now, the so-called fairer sex is not really that fair. Several years ago, when I studied this topic in depth, the topic of paternity fraud, it was about 1 child in every classroom in Britain being raised by a man who they thought was daddy, but really wasn't, and none of them knew. And it is still the case today, with most people simply not realizing just how dangerous this situation is. And it will get a lot worse, mind you, because no matter how much legislation governments pass and parliaments pass, DNA testing is now like the internet. The cat is out of the bag and there is nothing the governments can do to effectively censor it. You can trim it here and there, maybe, if you're lucky, but that's pretty much it. With the advent of ancestry tests as well, the cat is totally out of the bag. The good news is that we will be getting much more accurate statistics about the extent to which paternity fraud is committed by women as a group. Although this offends intersectionalist feminists, paternity fraud is a crime, and it is literally the only crime that has a sex. And that sex is female. Now, how that information will be used depends on every political operative out there. I think we should aim very high. Paternity fraud needs to become once again one of the most serious crimes in family law. At the very least, it should come with automatic back payment being deducted from the woman's income and transferred to the man, with interest and punitive damages for all the years he spent time, energy, resources and money raising a child that was not his, and that should be the minimum. I'm not saying it is an ideal response, but I am saying that as a negotiation starter, those of us who believe lying cunts should be held accountable should start from the most extreme position possible so that any negotiation still ends up in our territory. I mean, I'm just saying. Also, as a policy measure, paternity tests should be part of the standard medical recommendations at every birth. And the men who don't want it, either because they don't want to pay for it or they happen to trust their wives, they should be made to sign an explicit waiver. You know, like a GDPR disclaimer. This would have the men think twice before refusing to, or at least start thinking about the possibility, because many men don't even think that they might have been duped. And understandably so. Many men, I would say at least a third, tend to be incredibly credulous and fully trusting the woman next to them from the first month of the relationship. The proportion rises to an outright majority by the first year of the relationship and continues to climb to almost 100% by the fifth year of the relationship. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I am saying that men who are in love tend to do stupid things quite often. As a result, some third-party wake-up call may not be such a bad idea. Alrighty, going to Africa for a bit. From Quartz, Africa, Kenya will start teaching Chinese to elementary schools from 2020. Kenya will teach Mandarin in classrooms in a bid to improve job competitiveness and facilitate better trade and connection with China. The country's Curriculum Development Institute has said the design and scope of the Mandarin syllabus has been completed and will be rolled out in 2020. Primary school pupils from grade 4 and onwards will be able to take the course, the head of the agency, Julius Duan, told Xinhua, a news agency. Zhuan said the language is being introduced given Mandarin's growing global rise and the deepening political and economic connections between Kenya and China. The place of China in the world economy has also grown to be strong that Kenya stands to benefit for its citizens can understand Mandarin, Zhuan noted. Kenya follows in the footsteps of South Africa, which began teaching the language in schools in 2014, and Uganda, which is planning mandatory Mandarin lessons for high school students, close quote. So, y'all complained really hard about colonialism, even fought a harsh war that you lost against the British in the 1950s. And now, with finally some decent democracy and with full independence, the Chinese come in and colonize whatever they want without firing a single shot. Mind you, I'm not blaming the Chinese for trying, but I am blaming the locals for allowing it and also for being naive enough to believe that the communist Chinese rule would be better than Churchill-era United Kingdom. Basically, this will be a very fun century in the portions of Africa where China has been building up influence. When this era will end, and it will for sure, the horror stories about the Western colonialism will be fairy tales from a magical era when things worked when compared to the horror stories of Chinese communist colonialism, which are due to be written in the coming decades. And allowing all of this to happen has one single name: insanity, madness. But hey, who am I to question the democratic will of the people? Because we all know that the Chinese Communist Party would never, ever bribe officials of a foreign land to advance the highly subversive Chinese cultural centers. No, of course not. It's just the democratic will of the people to get Mandarin Chinese in the Kenyan schools and make the language curricula even more complicated. Because learning Kiswahili, Arabic, French, German, and English, just wasn't enough. Okay, let's go to the piece of news that's so insane and extreme that it made even many so-called pro-choicers sick. National Review. New York State Senate passes bill permitting abortions up to birth. The New York State Senate passed the Reproductive Health Act this evening by a vote of 38 to 24 on the 46th anniversary of the Supreme Court decision in Roe v. Wade, which found that a woman has a constitutional right to abortion. The bill already passed the state assembly by a 92 to 47 vote. Once signed by Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo, who has long pushed for expansive abortion rights legislation, the bill will expand the state's already liberal abortion regime to allow late-term abortions when the patient is within 24 weeks from the commencement of pregnancy, or there is an absence of fetal viability, or the abortion is necessary to protect the patient's life or health. The legislation provides a further exception to permit abortion at any point during pregnancy if a healthcare practitioner deems it necessary for the mother's life or health, the exception that was defined in Roe companion case Doe v. Bolton as all factors, physical, emotional, psychological, familial, and the woman's age, relevant to the well-being of the patient. In other words, abortion will be available to women essentially on demand up to the point of birth. The Reproductive Health Care Act will also decriminalize abortion, moving it from the state's criminal code to the public health code. Earlier this month, Cuomo said he hopes to put abortion rights on the ballot next year and have expansive protections for abortion, similar to the Reproductive Health Care Act, written into the state constitution. Here's more from Katie Yoders reporting on the bill at National Review earlier this month. Current New York law doesn't appear to discourage women from abortion at all. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, most recent abortion surveillance report for the year 2015, New York City performed 544 abortions for every 1,000 live births. That means roughly 1 in 3 unborn babies are aborted in the city. That also means the New York City's abortion rate makes up more than half of the city's birth rate. With the state's voluntary reported data, the CDC found that 63,646 abortions occurred in the New York City during 2015, with 32.8 abortions per 1,000 women between the ages of 15 and 44. New York, with the city and state data combined, saw a lower number in 2015. As a whole, New York performed 93,096 abortions in total, with 23.1 abortions per 1,000 women of childbearing age. It counted 392 abortions per 1,000 live births. Close quote. Now, other than Jesus fucking Christ, I really don't know what to say. Seriously. And the National Review article is pretty tame given the gravity of the situation. I would urge you to read the law, specifically the passages about what happens if the baby survives abortion. I don't think I'm even allowed to quote that law on YouTube. It reads like it was written by a fiction novel character that is a serial child murderer. Except it's not fiction, it's legislative text. Which basically says that if you're a doctor and not fully down to systemic execution of children in the most psychopathic way imaginable, then you have to go, because women have the absolute right to contract services of child murderers, and the taxpayers have to pay for it. Governor Cuomo celebrated this by lighting up the One World Trade Center in pink. Now, what we should do is to work very hard to make it the standard to associate pink with child murder. Because, I'm saying basically, let's broadcast Cuomo's underlying message. Other than that, I don't know what can I say that doesn't break any law somewhere. Suffice to say that I'm not entirely sure whether human rights should apply to those who voted for this law, because I'm not entirely sure whether those who biped beings are indeed human and thus qualify for human rights. I'm just not convinced. I think there's a need for more evidence for that. The evidence so far is far from convincing. I don't know. Call me a lunatic and an extremist if you want, but it's really hard to remain calm with people who legalize and institutionalize the murdering of infant children. In my book, such atrocities should be punished by medieval style of torture. 1 year of torture at a minimum, and then by burning at the stake. But then again, I am not civilized and a refined individual, but rather, what did they used to call normal men a while ago? An unreconstructed man. Ultimately, I'm hoping President Trump appoints Amy Barrett to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg at the Supreme Court, and this horrifying insanity then gets knocked down. I mean, seriously, this is barbaric. And it's barbaric even by European progressive standards. And whoever supports this kind of legislation is either insane or a legit psychopath, in the most clinical sense. Alright, let's move on. To more anti-children, far-left insanity. The Daily Mail. Gay male couple to be offered IVF treatment by the NHS for the first time in Britain. 2 gay men have been offered IVF treatment by the NHS in what is believed to be the first case of its kind in Britain. The married couple hope to conceive their own baby using sperm from one of them and a surrogate mother who will bear the child. The NHS will fund the process of a donor egg being fertilized and the resultant embryo implanted into the surrogate mother. The NHS has until recently refused to give gay male couples such treatment because of a blanket ban on using surrogate mothers. The Scottish Government changed that policy 2 years ago, so any couple, regardless of gender or sexual orientation, is eligible for free fertility treatment. That decision marked the biggest shift since 2013, when NHS guidance across Scotland, England and Wales made IVF available to same-sex couples and single women with fertility problems. But because of the ban on surrogates, in practice same-sex couples meant only women. They had to demonstrate their infertility by showing they had failed to get pregnant after several attempts with artificial insemination. The Scottish couple, who the Mail on Sunday has decided not to identify, revealed they were set to undergo NHS treatment when they posted an appeal online for an egg donor. One of the men wrote, "Our NHS clinic don't have any anonymous egg donors. They advised us we would need to find a known egg donor. Any suggestions how to go about it?" A friend replied, "Wow, didn't know Scotland were offering this on the NHS. Yes, it's a new service they offer in Scotland. We only found out about it when the GP referred us." Gay rights group Stonewall said, "We welcome any move that ensures lesbian, gay, bi and trans people have fair and equal access to fertility treatment." A Scottish government spokesman confirmed fertility treatment was offered to men in some same-sex relationships who had fertility problems, including same-sex male couples using a surrogate, but he emphasized the NHS would not find the surrogate. While a single IVF policy applies to the whole of Scotland, the situation is more complicated in England, where each of around 200 clinical commissioning groups sets eligibility rules. It is thought that there have been no cases of IVF treatment for a gay male couple being funded by the NHS in England. In Wales, fertility treatment for gay couples is in theory available on the NHS, although its policy states that surrogacy IVF will only be provided where no other fertility treatment options are available and strictly for medical reasons. Josephine Quintaval, founder of pro-life group Comment on Reproductive Ethics, said, "It's a total distortion of what constitutes a genuine fertility problem. It does seem extraordinary the extremities that people will go to distort nature to create a child." Close quote. Now, you tell me, how is this not insane? Is the slope slippery enough yet, or you're gonna still claim that gay marriage has no negative consequences, no negative effects on non-consenting third parties such as, the rest of the society? Because clearly this isn't about children. It's about the vanity of these two dudes. They don't care, and they don't have to care about the repercussions. They've been told it's homophobic to even question their vanity, and now the society gets to pay for their vanity. The NHS being the exact same institution that killed Alfie Evans just because they could. And to think there are still millions of Britons out there who not only tolerate the continual existence of the NHS, but are actually proud of it. What a joke. Admittedly, a twisted and sick and bizarre joke, but a joke nonetheless. Alright, more from the LGBT QWERTY insanity. Bruce Jenner is still a man. Sign at Northern California church draws protesters, titles the Sacramento Bee. A Northern California church put a provocative anti-gay and anti-transgender message on its sign for the new year, and provoke it did. Bruce Jenner is still a man. Homosexuality is still sin, read the sign outside the Trinity Bible Presbyterian Church in Weed, California, not far from the Oregon border. The culture may change, the Bible does not. On Saturday, Pastor Justin Hoke wrote on Facebook that he had parted ways with the church to avoid a split in the congregation over the sign, reported the Sacramento Bee. On 2 successive Sundays, people from across the Siskiyou County gathered at the church to protest the sign, viewing it as hateful and exclusionary. As a community, I hope that we can come together to show our love and support for the LGBTQ community in protest to the hate and slander it's being thrown at them, organizers of the Shastina Love Rally at the church wrote in a Facebook event planning the January 6th protest. Another protest took place on Sunday, KDRV reports, and now protesters will be raising money to repair the sign, which was broken in what Hoke characterized as an act of vandalism against his congregation. The protest will also raise funds for an LGBTQ cause, an organizer wrote on Facebook. They broke not only the plexiglass and stole some of the letters, they also busted the power box, Hoke wrote on Facebook. I have not seen it up close yet, as this picture was sent to me by a member of our congregation. As of Thursday afternoon, the sign was back up with the same message. Protest organizers say they don't believe anyone associated with their group damaged the sign. While we all object strongly to the message that they displayed publicly, we condemn the use of violence and destruction of property that this person responsible has chosen. To our knowledge, nobody affiliated with our peaceful rally was involved, and if we do become aware of the culprit, we'll be informing the local authorities. Hoke said his congregants support the message, which the church posted in early January to spur reflection on the modern world, the San Francisco Gate reports. The ultimate purpose was to say that while the culture may change, the Bible does not, Hoke said. The culture is now demanding that we call good what the Bible calls evil. Protesters said the sign conflicts with what the community as a whole believes. People say if you don't like it, move, said Sharon Lamonaco, a Shastina Lake resident, according to Siskiyou Daily News. Well, I've been lived here in my family home for the past 15 years and fully do expect my granddaughter and her wife will live here after me. Hope defended himself on Facebook, the Daily News reports. He also said his controversial sign is nothing new in the community. I have used this sign for 7 years now to provoke reflection or make a strong point about a single truth. Such as this one, the culture does not determine truth. God does. The funny thing is I could have put those words up and nobody would have cared. Why? Because it does not rebuke sin or call anyone to repentance. Hoke suggested the backlash was a sign to the sign meant his views won't be welcome anywhere. If a conservative mountain farming community is no longer a safe place to call sin, then is anywhere in this country still safe for real Christians? Hoke asked, according to the Daily News. One rally organizer asked Hoke to remove the sign, but he said he wouldn't. Well, the pastor makes a good point, but he makes a good point a bit too late. This is actually the problem with many religious conservatives. They're not willing to fight until it's way too late. Where were the religious conservatives in the year 2000? Or even 2005, when most of this lunacy could have effectively been stopped in its tracks? Most of them were busy publishing creationist nonsense or whining about rock music. Well, 20 years down the line, and then there is no more decent rock music in his area because all have already been driven out by the puritanical left for being something phobic. And now even your remote church gets targeted by militant far-left anti-theist or indeed anti-science activists. Because yes, Jenner is still a man and will die a man, and there's nothing wrong with that. Now, all is not lost, but unlike 20 years ago, the fight will have to be a lot nastier than it could have been if religious conservatives had woken up on time. Because unlike 20 years ago, you can no longer appeal to basic decency, especially not in California. So now it will take longer because you first have to teach basic decency once again, alongside with the courage, the moral courage, to speak the truth even if it offends the plebs. And here comes another problem, this time specific to Christians, especially Protestant Christians. Most churches are cucked to the core, including the Catholic Church, which, let us not forget, is run by a militant Marxist. And in the US, the Catholic clergy is busy siding with the far-left media in smearing young Catholic boys over imaginary racism, but it's nowhere to be found when Catholic Cuomo legalizes child murder. Maybe by the time this video gets published, there will be a letter of excommunication sent to all of those Catholic legislators now in New York, but as of the moment of this recording, the hierarchs of the church haven't been able to do the bare minimum on their part, namely to formally exclude those who have enacted child murder into legislation. With Protestants, it's even worse, most of them being de facto leftist feminists. Messaging about the sin of abortion and about genderist nonsense has either disappeared for fear of pissing off the congregation, or in some cases, the leftist message has been fully embraced, and you have pastors now who like to pretend that God is actually very okay with all of that. Basically, at this point, I know quite a few atheists who are de facto more Christian than many of those whose role is to be the guardians of the Christian message. So, what should be done? Well, for starters, stop backing down and stop shying away from being pragmatic about propaganda. In this vein, I will remind everyone again that in France there is a working alliance between Catholic activists and radical feminists on the issue of combating the transgenderist insanity. Maybe others should take note. But the idea of just shrugging off when the far-left thugs destroy your property because they don't like public displays of biological reality must go. The assumption that our philosophical opponents are just decent people who disagree politically must yield to the more realistic view, namely that the far left are enemy combatants in a propaganda war. And it's funny that I have to say this, given that the very word propaganda originates from the Vatican, so conservative Catholics in particular should be leading the intellectual charge on the propaganda warfare undertaking, because they can rely on the longest tradition of propaganda, several hundreds of years longer than the left's tradition in propaganda. Whatever. There's room for one more. I'll take the funnier one because I'm tired of being serious. The Daily Wire. Trump trolled Warren on Twitter. Leftists are so mad they reported him to Melania. On Thursday, President Trump retweeted a meme from the Daily Wire that mocked Senator Elizabeth Warren's nascent presidential campaign. In response, leftists on Twitter decided to report the action to Melania Trump. Trump retweeted this. This is the meme. Trump has often mocked Elizabeth Warren for claiming she had Native American heritage, which ultimately prompted her into taking a DNA test that only left her wide open for more mockery, as it found that the generational range based on the ancestor that the report identified suggested she was only between one of 64th or one of 1024th Native American, as the Boston Globe reported. Comedian Tony Posnanski tweeted, while Donald Trump attacks Elizabeth Warren this morning to his millions of followers, I would like to thank Melania Trump for her amazing anti-bullying Be Best campaign, which is doing amazing in 2019. MSLSD contributor Joyce Allen echoed, if the GOP feels it's appropriate to have a president campaign at a name-calling, bullying level an elementary school principal would feel compelled to shut down, they should let him keep on. Otherwise, hold him accountable as the leader of your party. One Twitter user alerted the president's wife, writing, "Hey, at Flotus, is this Be Best? Shame on you for being such a hypocrite, preaching the rest of us about the evils of cyberbullying while you live with and feed off the cyberbully-in-chief. Hashtag Melania, hashtag Trump, hashtag Elizabeth Warren." I mean, can you imagine this level of insanity? I mean, I'm laughing here because it is legit funny. But imagine how insanely sad some leftists really are if their reaction is to report the president to the first lady. I mean, seriously, how much of a weirdo you'd have to be for your reaction to a joke you personally don't like to be to report that person to his significant other? I mean, talking in elementary school terms, how much of a snitch can you be? And staying in elementary school lexicon, it's probably a good moment to remind everyone that snitches get stitches. The bringing up of elementary school analogies by the left is accidental. It is not accidental. It may have been by accident, or dare I say, a Freudian slip, but it's not accidental. The modern Twitter leftist is, for the most part, stuck in perpetual childhood. Mentally, many, if not most of them, are still in elementary school. That's part of the reason they're still leftists. Because who are the snitches? the weakest and the lamest kids on the block. Those are the ones who rat out everyone to the principal for their audacity to have fun without noticing them, the weakest and the lamest kids on the block. Those snitches then physically grow up, but they do retain that snitch mentality, and in adult life they continue to yearn for a principal to which they could snitch those who are stronger, cooler, and yes, better than they are, in the hope that the principal would then punish the superior kids and bring them down to the snitch's low and pathetic level. That is in part the primary guiding instinct of most of the modern, urban, Twitter-addicted leftists. Once you understand this perspective, it then makes sense why they would try their luck with such stunts. As for the claims of hypocrisy on the part of the First Lady, I could not care less. Elizabeth Warren is a public figure. If she can't withstand some taunting, then maybe she should get back to a more private life. The idea that sharing a meme is bullying is also the result of the mentality that is so typical to the weakest and lamest kid on the block. The one who wants everything but is unwilling to work for anything, is uncompromising in anything, and if you fail to comply with his irrational demands, he'll snitch you to the principal because you said fuck you, hoping that the principal will be an equally demented leftist who will then deem the others as bullies. We all know that kind of typology. Anyway, that's it for Periodic Insanity for now. I don't know when the next episode will come, but probably in late March, if not even later. I don't even want to think of the pile of links that I will have gathered by then. So, with all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your continuous and generous support. Please do consider throwing a shekel should you derive any value from the work being done here. Do check out our website, and I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.